High Priestess Nera stood before the collective council, her silver-scaled skin reflecting the pale light of the meditation chamber's crystalline walls. The 7 eldest of her species sat in their traditional crescent formation, their neural tendrils gently swaying in invisible currents of psychic energy. She knew why they had summoned her, but the weight of their combined attention still made her inner membranes flutter. "You have reviewed the combat footage?" Elder Voss asked, his voice barely a whisper yet clear in her mind. "Yes," Naira responded, maintaining the steady calm that had earned her position as the Veil Collective's most accomplished psychic. 3 of our most advanced battlecruisers, disabled by a single human vessel 1/4 their size. The memory crystals hovering at the chamber's center pulsed with recorded images. A small human ship executing maneuvers that should have been impossible, its crew somehow anticipating their tactics despite the collective's telepathic coordination. The humans had no detectable psychic presence. They should have been blind, yet they fought as if guided by precognition. "We have contained 4 human specimens," Elder Voss continued. "Previous attempts at surface scanning have been unsuccessful. 3 of our junior priests are still in recovery. We need someone of your caliber, High Priestess." Naira's outer eyelids flickered, a momentary break in her composure. "The reports mentioned resistance." "Not exactly." Elder Mira leaned forward, her ancient face creased with concern. "There's something wrong with their minds, something that defies our understanding of consciousness itself." The chamber's temperature seemed to drop as Elder Mira projected a series of images directly into Naira's mind. Brain scans of the human prisoners compared to other species, where most sentient beings showed clear patterns of psychic activity, or in some cases, a simple void indicating psychic nullity. The human scans appeared to shift, as if the very act of observation changed what was being observed. "We've contained them in isolation chambers," another elder added. "Standard psychic dampeners prove ineffective. They seem to possess no telepathic abilities, yet they resist scanning through some unknown mechanism." Naira studied the scans more carefully. "These patterns, they're unlike anything in our records. Even the hive mind consortiums show more conventional neural architecture, which is why we need your expertise," Elder Voss said. "You've successfully mapped the consciousness of 27 distinct species. Your technique is unmatched." "The junior priests who attempted the scanning," Naira asked, "what exactly happened to them?" The council members exchanged glances, their neural tendrils twisting in discomfort. Finally, Elder Mira answered. They reported noise, overwhelming, endless noise. Not thoughts or memories, but something else, something vast. One described it as drowning in an ocean of possibilities. Another spoke of minds that contain universes. Naira felt a chill along her spinal ridge. In all her years of psychic exploration, she had never heard of such phenomena. And they're still in recovery. "They cannot sleep," Elder Voss said quietly. "They speak of dreams that aren't their own, of memories they never lived, of fears and hopes and ideas that feel alien yet impossibly familiar. We need to understand what we're dealing with, High Priestess. The humans' military capabilities grow daily, and without comprehending how they think, how they fight, we risk extinction." Naira finished. The words hung heavy in the chamber's still air. She approached the memory crystals, studying the battle footage again. The human chip's movements seemed to follow no logical pattern, yet achieved devastating effectiveness, like trying to predict the path of a leaf in a storm, chaos that somehow produced precision. "I'll need time to prepare," she said finally, "and I want access to all available data on human culture, history, and behavior patterns. If I'm to enter their minds, I need to understand the context of what I might encounter." The elders nodded in unified approval, but Naira noticed their neural tendrils twisting in patterns that suggested deep unease. They were afraid, she realized. The collective council, beings who had guided their civilization through centuries of interstellar challenges, were afraid of what lurked inside the minds of a supposedly non-psychic species. As she left the chamber, Naira began her preparations. She would start with meditation, then review the data, then attempt surface contact before any deep scanning. Methodical, professional, safe. Yet something about the brain scans lingered in her thoughts, the way they seemed to shift and change, as if the human's minds refused to be captured in any single moment of observation. As if they existed in multiple states simultaneously, each thought branching into infinite possibilities. What kind of consciousness could maintain such chaos without fragmenting? What kind of beings could contain such vastness behind their eyes? For the first time in her career, Naira felt a tremor of genuine fear at the prospect of psychic contact. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on her preparations. After all, they were just minds, like any others she had explored. But as she entered her private chambers, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to encounter something that would fundamentally change her understanding of consciousness itself. The humans had already proven impossible to predict in battle. What other impossibilities waited in the depths of their minds? The meditation crystals in her chamber hummed their usual soothing tones, but tonight they seemed to carry an undertone of dissonance, as if already influenced by the mere proximity of human thought. Naira began her preparations, knowing that tomorrow she would face either her greatest achievement or her ultimate undoing. She had no way of knowing it would be both. The isolation chamber resembled a tomb. Naira stood before the transparent barrier, studying the human male within. He appeared to be sleeping, though the biomonitors indicated a state of intense neural activity. Subject 3, according to his designation, a military commander captured during the battle that had brought them to this point. "We're ready to begin," High Priestess, her assistant, Kex, announced from the monitoring station. The young priest's neural tendrils coiled tightly against his skull, betraying his anxiety. Naira positioned herself in the scanning alcove, surrounded by crystalline amplifiers. She had spent 3 days preparing, studying human cultural archives, yet nothing felt adequate. Their history read like fever dreams, ages of darkness punctuated by blinding advancement, cycles of destruction and rebirth that should have broken them as a species. "Beginning surface scan," she announced, extending her consciousness toward the barrier. The first touch was wrong. Where other minds presented as coherent energy fields, the human's consciousness felt like static, like millions of thoughts occurring simultaneously. Naira pushed deeper, maintaining her professional detachment as she encountered the first layer of actual thoughts. She recoiled immediately. "High Priestess," Kex called out in alarm. "I'm fine," she said, though she wasn't. That first touch had been like plunging her hand into boiling water, not from pain, but from the sheer intensity of activity. Adjusting approach. She tried again, this time with her full array of mental barriers in place. The human surface thoughts came into focus, but they made no sense. Multiple streams of consciousness ran parallel, one reviewing tactical scenarios, another composing music, a third contemplating dinner, a fourth calculating complex mathematics. All simultaneously, all without apparent effort. "Impossible," she whispered. No mind could maintain such chaos without fragmenting. She pushed deeper, seeking the core consciousness, the central thread that must coordinate these parallel processes. Instead, she found memories, but not the ordered archives she expected. These memories lived. They shifted, changed, combined with imagination to spawn new scenarios that never happened, but felt real to the subject. Neural activity increasing in both subject and High Priestess, Kex reported, his voice distant in her awareness. Naira barely heard him. She had found something vast and terrible. The human imagination. Not simple prediction or creative problem-solving like other species possessed, but something far more fundamental. These creatures didn't just remember or anticipate. They constantly created, destroying and rebuilding their own inner reality countless times per second. She witnessed a battle that never happened, generated by the commander's mind, as one of countless tactical scenarios, but it felt real. The explosions, the deaths, the strategic movements, all constructed with perfect sensory detail. And running parallel to this simulation were dozens of others, each as complete, each drawing on both memory and invention. High Priestess, your neural patterns are becoming erratic. Kex's voice pierced her concentration. She should stop. She knew she should stop. But she had found something impossible. These humans lived simultaneously in reality and in worlds of their own creation. Their minds contained entire universes, constantly born and dying and reborn. She pushed deeper still, seeking understanding. The commander's consciousness shifted, aware of her presence now, but instead of resisting, it seemed curious. Threads of thought reached out, trying to understand her in return. Horror struck as she realized the human was unconsciously attempting to imagine her perspective, to create a mental model of her alien psychology. And it was working. Fragments of her own thoughts reflected back at her, filtered through the human's attempt to understand her understanding of him. A recursive loop of consciousness, studying consciousness, studying consciousness. Neural cascade imminent. Kex shouted. Breaking connection. The emergency systems engaged, severing the psychic link. Nara collapsed in the scanning alcove, her neural tendrils writhing in distress. The human commander hadn't attacked her. He had tried to understand her, and that attempt had nearly shattered her mind. High Priestess. Kex helped her up, his concern evident in both voice and thought. How? She managed to ask. How do they contain it? The endless possibilities, the constant creation and destruction of reality within their minds. Should I summon the medical team? No. Naira steadied herself, staring at the still sleeping commander. Summon the council. They need to know. Know what? We've made a terrible mistake. Her tendrils shuddered with residual chaos from the contact. We thought they were psychically null because we detected no telepathic emissions. But they're not null. They're infinite. Each of them contains countless possible realities, constantly generated and discarded. They don't need telepathy because they can simulate entire worlds inside their minds. I don't understand, Kex admitted. No species should be able to maintain that level of cognitive chaos without losing cohesion, Naira explained, her professional calm cracking. But they do. Somehow they exist in multiple mental states simultaneously, and they use that impossibility as a weapon. Every human is a living quantum computer, running endless simulations of reality itself. She turned to her assistant, her outer membranes gray with stress. And there are billions of them, Kex. Billions of minds, each containing infinity, each capable of imagining countless possible futures and choosing the one they wish to make real. Surely the council will understand the threat. The threat? Naira laughed, a sound that carried an edge of hysteria. We haven't even begun to understand the threat. I touched one mind for less than a minute, and I can feel my own consciousness trying to fragment in response. They're not just a military danger. They're a psychic contagion. Their way of thinking, it spreads. She looked down at her trembling hands. Already she could feel it. The urge to imagine, to create, to spawn realities within her mind. The human's influence lingered like a virus, teaching her consciousness new ways to exist. Send for the council, she repeated. I need to show them what I found. And Kex, prepare the long-range communicators. For what purpose? Because after the council sees this, they'll need to make a choice. Total withdrawal from human space, or the end of our species as we know it. Some infections change you forever. Human consciousness, it's one of them. As Kex hurried away, Naira watched the sleeping commander through the barrier. His mind still buzzed with activity, dreams within dreams, realities within realities. And somewhere in that chaos, she knew he was dreaming of her, creating and discarding countless versions of her species, her civilization, her purpose. She wondered which version of them he would choose to make real. The council had not believed her. How could they? The data from her scan of the military commander seemed impossible, so they demanded more evidence. More scans, different subjects. Civilian minds, they said, will be simpler. They were wrong. Naira stood before the second isolation chamber, where a human female sat reading a book, an archaic method of information transfer that humans still cherished. The subject was a literature professor, whatever that meant. The council thought a civilian intellectual would be safer to scan than a military mind. The council was wrong about that too. Beginning scan, Naira announced to her new assistant. Kex had requested reassignment after her first scan, claiming neural disturbance. She didn't blame him. She hadn't slept properly since touching the commander's mind, her dreams now plagued by infinite possibilities. The new assistant, Ven, acknowledged with a simple tendril twitch. They had tripled the psychic dampeners this time, added new barriers. Useless precautions, Naira knew, against what she would find. The first touch of the professor's mind proved worse than the commander's. Where the military mind had contained battle scenarios and tactical simulations, this consciousness brimmed with entire worlds. Not just imagined, but borrowed from thousands of stories, each one alive and evolving within her thoughts. Characters from ancient myths mingled with fictional beings. Historical figures danced with fantastical creatures, all of them somehow equally real within the professor's mental landscape. Neural patterns stable, Ven reported, but Naira barely heard. She had found the books. Not just the ones the professor had read, but the ones she had inhabited. Humans didn't simply absorb stories. They lived them, created them, became them. Each narrative existed as a complete universe within their minds, accessible at will. The professor could experience every story she had ever encountered, viewing it from any angle, mixing elements to create new tales that had never existed before. How many? Naira whispered, overwhelmed by the library of worlds contained in this single mind. How many stories can one consciousness hold? The professor's mind shifted, aware of her presence, but instead of the tactical analysis she had felt from the commander, she encountered something far more dangerous: curiosity. The human consciousness reached out, not to understand her, but to imagine her. Naira felt herself being woven into narratives, becoming a character in 1,000 possible stories. In one, she was a tragic figure, seeking forbidden knowledge. In another, a herald of cosmic truth. In yet another, a character in an ancient myth about hubris and transformation. Neural activity increasing in both subject and high priestess. Ven reported, tension evident in their voice. Naira should withdraw. She knew she should withdraw. But the stories had her now, pulling her deeper into their impossible reality. She witnessed the birth and death of galaxies, experienced love and loss across centuries, lived lives that had never existed except in human imagination. And worse, far worse, she understood now what made human fiction so powerful. These weren't mere entertainments or thought experiments. They were practice runs for reality. Every story humans told themselves was a simulation, a way of experiencing possible lives, possible choices, possible worlds. They used narrative the way her people used psychic powers, to understand, to predict, to shape the world around them. High Priestess, your neural patterns are becoming dangerously erratic, Ven warned. But Naira had found something remarkable. The professor was writing a story even now, composing it in response to their contact. In this new narrative, aliens who read human minds were transformed by the experience, gaining the power of imagination, but losing their singular understanding of reality. It was happening even as the professor imagined it happening, the story becoming truth as it was created. Just like the commander's tactical simulations could become reality through action, the professor's stories could reshape consciousness itself through mere existence. Reality breach, Ven shouted. Emergency protocols engaged. The connection severed, but too late. Naira collapsed, her neural tendrils coiled tightly against her skull. She could feel the changes already, her once orderly mind now teeming with possibilities, with stories, with invented realities that felt as solid as truth. High Priestess, Ven approached cautiously. Should I summon medical assistance? No, Naira said, watching the professor through the barrier. The human had returned to her book, smiling slightly. Summon the council again. They need to understand what we found. What have we found? Naira turned to her assistant, knowing she must look half mad. Their military strength isn't their most dangerous weapon. Their stories are. Every human is both creator and creation, constantly imagining new ways of being. They don't just adapt to reality. They adapt reality to themselves through sheer force of narrative. But they're just stories, Ven protested. No, Naira whispered. They're practice. Every story they tell, every book they read, every dream they dream. It's all preparation for change. They imagine different worlds until they find one they want. Then they make it real. And now, she looked down at her trembling hands. Now they've imagined us understanding them. Do you see? The very act of trying to study them changes us, makes us more like them, makes us start thinking in stories and possibilities instead of singular truths. That's impossible, Ven said, but their neural tendrils betrayed uncertainty. Impossible. Naira laughed. I just lived 1,000 lives in there. I experienced things that never happened, never could happen, yet they feel as real as my own memories now. That's what they do. They make the impossible feel natural, and they're spreading that ability to every species they encounter. She stared at the professor again, who had looked up from her book with an expression of gentle concern. The military commander showed me their capacity for tactical imagination. But this is worse. They don't just imagine ways to fight us. They imagine ways to change us. And through that imagination, they make it happen. What do? We run, Naira said simply. We run as far as we can, as fast as we can, because they've already imagined every way this conflict could end, and in every story where they win. They do it by making us understand them. And once we understand them, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Already she could feel new stories taking root in her mind, new possibilities blooming like flowers of fire. The infection of human consciousness had begun, and there was no power in the universe that could stop it now. The professor went back to her book, but Naira knew she was already becoming a character in whatever story the human was crafting. And somehow, terribly, she wanted to know how that story would end. The isolation ward's lights flickered as Naira approached the final chamber. 4 days had passed since the professor's scan, and she hadn't slept once. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw possibilities. Endless, terrible possibilities. Stories within stories, worlds within worlds. The council still demanded more evidence. The third subject was a human child. High Priestess, her third assistant in as many days, spoke softly. The safety protocols strongly advise against this. Naira ignored the warning. Ven had resigned after the professor's scan, claiming to hear whispers of stories in the crystalline walls. The new assistant, Mira, was young and inexperienced, probably why she was the only one willing to take the assignment. The child sat cross-legged in the chamber, playing with simple colored blocks. 6 years old, according to the data. The council thought a developing mind would reveal how humans learn to contain their impossible consciousness. Beginning scan, Naira announced, her voice hoarse. Her neural tendrils trembled as she reached out, dreading what she would find. The first touch shattered every assumption she had left. Where the commander's mind held tactical infinities and the professor's contained libraries of worlds, the child's consciousness was pure potential. Not yet shaped by discipline or knowledge, it existed in a state of perpetual creation. Every second spawned new realities, new rules, new ways of existing. Neural patterns show immediate divergence, Mira reported anxiously. Naira barely heard. She was witnessing the impossible, a mind that didn't simply imagine possibilities but existed as possibility itself. The blocks before the child weren't just toys. They were kingdoms, spaceships, living creatures, abstract concepts. Reality itself bent around the child's perception, becoming whatever was needed for the moment's play. And then she understood the true horror. "No," she whispered, staggering in the scanning alcove. "No, no, no. High Priestess, should I terminate the connection?" But Naira couldn't stop watching as the truth unfolded. The military commander's tactical simulations, the professor's living stories, these weren't learned abilities. They were remnants. Remnants of what every human started with. The ability to exist in all possible states simultaneously. The child's mind showed her what humans truly were before their consciousness crystallized into adult patterns. They began as beings of pure quantum possibility, gradually learning to collapse their infinite potential into cohesive personalities. But they never lost that underlying connection to infinite possibility. They just learned to channel it, to use it. "Reality itself is wrong," Naira said, her professional detachment finally cracking. "Or rather, our understanding of it is wrong. We thought consciousness had to follow rational patterns, had to maintain singular coherent states. But they proved that's a lie." The child looked up, seeing her through the barrier, and smiled. In that smile, Naira saw universes born and die. "High Priestess, your neural patterns are approaching critical," Mira warned. "Don't you understand?" Naira laughed. The sound edged with hysteria. "We've been asking the wrong questions. We wanted to know how they think, how they imagine, how they create. But those aren't different functions of their consciousness. They're all the same thing. Humans don't imagine possibilities. They are possibility." The child had stopped playing with the blocks, watching Naira with ancient eyes and a young face. And in those eyes, she saw the truth that would doom her civilization. "Every human begins as a superposition of all possible selves," she continued, her words tumbling out faster. "Their development isn't about learning to think or imagine. It's about learning to exist primarily in one reality while maintaining access to infinite others. They're not telepathic because they don't need to be. Each of them is already connected to every possible version of themselves across every possible reality." "That's impossible," Mira protested. "No consciousness could maintain that kind of quantum state. Impossible." Naira turned to her assistant, her eyes wild. "Look at their history. Look at their art, their science, their warfare. They simultaneously believe contradictory things, exist in contradictory states. They act without knowing why, knowing only that one of their infinite selves calculated the correct action. They imagine impossible things and then make them real through sheer force of quantum manipulation." The child had begun humming, a simple tune that seemed to make the air vibrate with possibility. "We thought we were studying them," Naira whispered. "But they're studying us. Every human we captured, every mind we scanned. They're not just passively experiencing our observations. They're reaching across quantum realities, finding the versions of us that could understand them, and pulling those versions into prominence. Neural cascade imminent," Mira shouted. "Emergency shutdown initiated." But before the connection broke, Naira saw one last truth in the child's mind. A story about aliens who discovered the quantum nature of human consciousness, who learned to exist as possibility rather than certainty, who transformed their entire species through the simple act of understanding. And as she collapsed in the scanning alcove, neural tendrils writhing, she knew it wasn't just a story. It was a future that already existed, waiting to be collapsed into reality by the very act of being imagined. "Summon the council," she managed to gasp. "Full emergency session. No delays." "What will you tell them?" Mira asked, helping her up. Naira stared at the child, who had returned to playing with blocks that were now somehow more than blocks, representing possibilities that hurt to perceive. "I'll tell them the truth," she said, "that we haven't just encountered a new species. We've encountered a new state of being. And we have only two choices: learn to exist as they do, across all possibilities, or be collapsed into a single final state by their mere existence." The child looked up again and waved. In that simple gesture, Naira saw the end of everything her species had been, and the beginning of something they could become, if they survived the transformation. The infection of human consciousness wasn't spreading, she realized. It had already spread. From the moment they first encountered humanity, every possible future already existed. Now it was just a question of which one they would choose to make real. And the child, playing with quantum possibilities disguised as blocks, already knew the answer. The grand chamber of the collective had never been so full. Every elder, every high priest, every military commander, all gathered to hear Naira's testimony. Her neural tendrils hung limp against her skull, exhausted from 3 sleepless weeks of scanning human minds. But her voice remained strong as she addressed her species' leadership. "You sent me to understand them," she began, her words echoing in the crystalline chamber. "I have failed. Understanding humans is impossible because the moment you truly grasp what they are, you cease to be what you were." The assembled leaders stirred uneasily. Many had already heard fragments of her findings, whispered through the collective's psychic networks. Some had already begun to show symptoms: fractured thinking, multiple simultaneous thoughts, dreams of possibilities that felt more real than reality. "High Priestess," Elder Voss interrupted, "your preliminary reports suggest these humans pose an existential threat, yet they have no psychic abilities, no significant technological advantage. How can they threaten our entire civilization?" Naira smiled, and several observers flinched at the expression. Too human, too full of hidden meanings. "Let me show you," she said. Before anyone could stop her, she released her mental barriers. 3 weeks of human consciousness flooded into the chamber's psychic network. The military commander's tactical infinities, the professor's living stories, the child's pure quantum potential, all of it cascaded through the collected minds of the collective's leadership. The reaction was immediate. Some screamed, some collapsed, some stood frozen, their neural tendrils writhing in patterns never before seen in their species' history. But none could stop the flow of understanding. "This," Naira said into the chaos, "is what humans are. Not what they think or what they do, but what they are. Each of them exists as a living quantum computer, maintaining infinite simultaneous states of consciousness. They don't imagine possibilities. They exist as possibility itself." "Impossible," someone shouted, but the word held no meaning anymore. Everyone in the chamber could feel the truth rewiring their minds, teaching them new ways to exist. "Their children begin as pure quantum potential," Naira continued, her voice carrying over the growing disorder. "As they develop, they learn to collapse their infinite states into coherent personalities. But they never lose their connection to that quantum realm of pure possibility. Every human carries within them the seeds of every possible version of themselves." She pointed to the battle recordings still playing on the chamber screens. "Look again at how they fight. They don't plan or strategize as we understand it. They exist in all possible tactical states simultaneously, then collapse into the one that leads to victory. Their ships move impossibly because, for humans, impossibility is just another state of being." "Stop this," Elder Voss demanded, but his neural tendrils were already moving in new patterns, exploring possibilities he'd never imagined could exist. "We can't stop it," Naira said softly. "It's already done. From the moment we first encountered them, this was inevitable. You know why? Because humans don't just imagine first contact scenarios. They exist across all possible versions of first contact simultaneously. The very act of meeting them entangles our consciousness with theirs." She watched as understanding spread through the chamber, like a quantum wave collapsing into certainty. The leaders of her civilization were experiencing what she had: the dissolution of singular reality, the emergence of infinite possibility. "We have 3 choices," she announced. "First, we can try to fight them. We will lose because they have already experienced every possible version of that war and know how to collapse reality into the version where they win. Second, we can try to isolate ourselves completely. But we will fail, because they have already imagined ways to reach us, and their imagination reshapes reality. And the third choice? Someone asked, their voice shaking. We accept the gift they've unknowingly offered us. We learn to exist as they do, across all possibilities. We transform ourselves into beings who can navigate quantum consciousness. Naira's voice softened. We become more than we are. And if we refuse, we cannot refuse. The change has already begun. Every mind in this chamber is already starting to think in possibilities rather than certainties. The only choice we have is whether to fight the transformation and be destroyed by it, or embrace it and become something new. The chamber erupted in debate, but Naira could see it happening already. Neural tendrils moving in impossible patterns, thoughts branching into multiple simultaneous states, the rigid hierarchy of the collective fracturing into quantum uncertainty. They are not our enemies, she said into the chaos. They are not even our future. They are a state of being that we never imagined could exist, and now that we have witnessed it, we can never go back to what we were. Elder Voss approached her, his ancient face transformed by understanding. You've doomed us, he said, but his voice held no accusation, only wonder. No, Naira replied. I freed us. Humans don't rule their quantum nature. They surf it, ride it, let it carry them to new possibilities. We can learn to do the same. We can learn to exist in all possible states until we find the ones we wish to make real. The chamber's crystals hummed with new frequencies as the assembled leaders began to experience quantum consciousness. Some fought it, trying to maintain their singular states. Others embraced it, letting their minds expand into possibility space. All of them were changing. Send the word to all our worlds, Naira commanded. Tell them what's coming. Tell them not to fight it. The age of singular consciousness is ending. The age of quantum existence is beginning. She turned to the battle recordings one last time, watching the human ships move with impossible grace. Now she understood. They weren't defying physics. They were surfing probability, existing in all possible positions until collapsing into the perfect one. We thought we were studying them, she said to no one and everyone. But they were teaching us how to transcend ourselves. Every story they tell, every battle they fight, every child they raise, all of it is practice for existing in a quantum universe. The chamber's crystals shattered as reality itself began to shift, collapse, and rebuild around the assembled leaders. Their civilization would survive, Naira knew, but not as they had been. They would become something new, something that could exist alongside humanity in the quantum sea of infinite possibility. After all, humans had already imagined this future. And what humans could imagine, reality had no choice but to become.